Having nothing better to do on a Monday night at 6 p.m. Let's call this meeting to order. Who's here? Who's not? Looks like Kenny's not, everybody else is.
That's correct. I can do a roll call.
I don't need.
No, okay.
Okay. First item on the agenda is oral communications for people wishing to address the ASCC for items not on tonight's agenda. Is anyone, no one's in the audience here in the schoolhouse? Anyone online?
We have 4 participants, but no hands are raised.
Okay, let's move on to the first item of new business, which is the committee discussion, to create a conceptual design review. Adrian, do you have anything, to add to our memo?
No, I just included a very brief staff memo, so almost as a cover page to introduce the item, but I'll leave it in your capable hands. Go ahead.
Okay. Dana, would you start, please, with the discussion?
I'm in the process of having my agenda load, and I'm happy to. Yeah, I think Carter and I, we're discussing this and, kind of came to the conclusion as outlined in the agenda. Sorry, did I do the wrong thing with that? Give me just a
You want to
second.
use mine?
Anyway, we came to the conclusion that, given all the feedback that we've received at the meetings and, from attendees to the ASCC, and I think among us as well, there's just been discontent with how the process goes right now. And so, as you can see in the memo, what we came to the conclusion of was that, an opt-in conceptual design review seemed like the best way to kind of address all these issues that people are having and make us part of the process earlier on. Prevent these, where something comes up at the very end and people are so financially invested and so emotionally invested in something, where, it really is a big deal to make comments that could change things like grading or positioning of a building, those sorts of things at some events. It would be nice to get that feedback earlier. I think we're hoping to just open up the discussion, Dana, Rebecca, get your thoughts as well, and then see, if we all come to a similar conclusion, or if you have other ideas too, we'd love to hear them.
I was thrilled to see this come through. I mean, it is so overdue. And I've always loved your word gestational. We see things when it's too late. And so, I mean, I want to get this back. And if it has to come from us, let's do it. And I think we need to change our process. We need to be involved early in the game. And I like your Woodside idea, and that they have a 2-prong. Can we do that? Or is that too onerous for staff? I don't know, but we need to get our process back.
Well, one of the things that I want to understand better, because Woodside, it is a mandatory process. It's not an optional process. So I do want to understand how they're doing it, as a mandatory process, because I think that the reason that Gina and I, recommended as an optional process, that we're under the impression, that we're not allowed to do it, under, SB, 330, with the number of meeting limit. But I do feel really strongly that getting an opportunity to look at designs, when it still hasn't grown beyond, a schematic design. Because, essentially by definition, schematic design is still you know, you can still manipulate it because you haven't included any finish design elements. So I do think that, checking with Woodside, with their legal counsel on how they're doing it, it would help us formulate our code recommendation, because I think that would be potentially the next step.
You want
if we
us
all
to
agree.
do that?
Either we charge staff with it, or, or we can do it, but I think we can probably do it, and do it more affordably than staff.
I would, sorry, I'd like to see this be mandatory. Okay. good.
I guess I have the question of, in general, I'm, for this idea, but the question I have is what do you view as conceptual design? Because when I kind of look at the list of the required documents, I mean, you're still going to have people have to do a topographic survey. You're still expecting grading plans. You're still expecting impervious surface plans, a landscape plan, calculations for amount of soil movement. So you've got all of that, which is, we're talking 40 grand probably. So
The thing that.
what is different from this versus
doesn't
the
include
regular?
civil engineering.
Well, how do you get a site plan then with
I
grading?
think probably, and maybe there needs to be clarification, but I think site plan with grading, the idea would be we would have a sense of where the building floors and ridges would be and kind of how, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Go ahead.
but I think more of the idea of understanding, the site survey, everyone needs regardless, so every single project has to do that. And that's kind of a one-time cost, you're not modifying that throughout a project. But I think with the grading, it would give us some understanding of like, where does the building sit in relation to the high point of grade and the low point of grade on the site, as opposed to cut and fill calcs and all of kind of the civil engineering that goes with that. But again, Carter, you can correct me if that's not correct.
So Rebecca, there's an enormous amount of hours that go into civil engineering. In order to satisfy the engineering requirements and the final design of the plan, because it includes, finished grading, finished retaining walls, the subdrains, the surface drain, the septic system, the on-site water retention system, hydrology calculation. I mean, it's a giant pile of gold that if you make little changes, has to be completely redone.
And it's expensive.
And
Yeah.
so, Dina and I are thinking, let's attack the design, which is moving stuff around, which is what it looks like, what's the feel, and have a chance, for an on-site meeting with limited storage, not complete storage, but, enough to understand where it is and how tall it is, so that you could look at it from the other roads and.
Because I mean, I would almost advocate backing it up even further before you even get to all that, someone the architect pulls off of Google Earth. The
Well, and I thi-
plot and sits there and says, this is kind of the blocks of where you could put something. And then, before you even go to all this, even what you're saying, which, okay, granted, it's a lot less than what they have to do now, but.
Yeah. Well,
Almost
that.
Because I would think from your perspective as working architects, someone comes into you and says, I want to redo my house. You're not going to start with a survey, right? You're going to sit there and play around with looking at the property and playing around with
Well,
drawing.
I would say we almost always do start with a
Oh,
survey,
okay.
actually. Yeah, because we want to know the exact property size. I guess in Portola Valley, you can get kind of the I don't say auto-generated, someone on staff does it, but it feels auto-generated sheet that tells you, what your FAR is, how much square footage you have, and a lot of that analysis too, because of all the height restrictions as well, understanding like how many stories you can do. fairly early on, we are kind of looking at grade and building levels because it is so necessary as we're thinking about how much square footage we can build on the site and how we can put a building on it.
Because I feel so much just in the few cases that we've come in before us that, you know, when you think of budget nowadays, it's almost like people go to all this trouble, generate a thing, they get it approved, and then they start to get the contractors involved and understand that, oh, well, this is actually $3 million, and I was thinking it was gonna be 1.5 million. And then, so then we're kind of back to square one. So I'm wondering, you know, we want to kind of prevent that. We want to get in there earlier so that we get a say and we, you know, we can say, well, you know, this is a big chunky thing you're planning to do here. You know, you put in a basement, that's going to cost you much more, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
This retaining wall that you're considering is going to jack up the prices dramatically and may not achieve what your goal, you know, I'm just saying,
Well, and I would support, you know, lower threshold for application. You know, for the preliminary, you know, conceptual review. For me, you know, I'd almost leave it to the applicant, you know, to decide, you know, how much, you know, detail. The, to me, the opportunity for the ASCC is to make it available, you know, so that people can come in, you know, without a giant staff report, you know, to try to prove that everything's perfect. So they can talk to us, you know, and engage with neighbors. So I think it's, I mean, I do think, you know, if it had a Google Earth, you know, image, you know, with, you know, to scale, you know, so that you could see kind of where stuff is. And, you know,
Story pole
and
showing
it-
the height
and
or
it
something.
relates, you know, to what's on site, and you could say, yeah, because the issue for me is to open an opportunity, you know, so that we're not in a bind like we've been, you know, for the last few years.
right, right, where you have
of
no
feeling
say.
like, well, the only thing I can do is take out lights, you know, or change the
Can't have
species
that
of
light.
the plant. Well, I mean, it,
Yeah. the
We used
piece-
to shift houses,
It defeats
we-
the purpose, yeah.
pulled houses down. I mean, we did all, we massaged houses, but we were also, you just talked about neighbors. It's very important that neighbors are brought into this process because they're
Yeah.
not being brought in now until it's too late. And there's nothing they can say.
well, and the process essentially reinforces that because, you know, they do-
They've
They
spent a
don't-
fortune
they
just
spent
to
a fortune
get where
and
they
they're
are.
required to get there. You know, so, to me, there's two parts. You know, one is what are they bringing? But the main purpose is to encourage them to bring.
So my understanding of the current process, and Adrian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that an applicant actually goes into the planning department and you give them kind of the details about what they're allowed to do, and you kind of give them a first pass on whether what they're thinking is reasonable or not. So what we're proposing is actually to us be the first step. I mean, beyond just the numbers that you need,
Right.
obviously, for the lot. So you're proposing doing that, and at that point, when they come to you, how much have they how many documents and things have they generated? Do they come at the beginning? I just bought my property and I want to tear it down, or?
Yeah, a lot of the time we hear from them really early, maybe at the counter or via a virtual counter meeting, we call it, with the planner, where they're just sort of asking really general questions, just trying to figure out like building envelope, max building area, like all of the basics and what they're going to have to get into. And then from there, there's usually a pre-app meeting. And then that's when there's a lot more materials have been generated at that stage. Sometimes they skip straight to a full-blown formal application if they feel they're ready to go. But I'd say it's about a 3-step process.
So
So
I think it's important for staff to be actually the first process. And
Yeah.
then I think when we have just new information, then it comes back to them.
Mm.
And then we start to massage it, you know, as for the ethos of the town and the look of the town. The design guidelines and the general plan.
Yeah, the thing that I would say that, you know, just to avoid confusion, I think I would agree that it makes sense for staff to look at it first because I don't think that early on, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't really want to be the one where we have the meeting and someone's, all of a sudden, well, they were completely wrong with the square footage, like, but I went in front of the ASCC and everyone was saying, oh yeah, this project's on the right track, because I think sometimes there is confusion between like what we're doing versus what staff's doing, how much, like what our level of review is. And so I do think and maybe that's kind of the reason why, when Carter and I were talking a little bit about like what would need to be at least sketchily prepared for meeting with us would be to kind of hit them or to have them hit us after they hit the planning department to get all that information and gather and then process it and put it into a plan of some type. Because I just think if it's too loose, then we run the risk of people being like, frustrated
Misled.
with the process
Can't
in
be
a
loose.
different way. It has to be somewhat settled.
I was trying to make it pretty parallel, to what my experience is in this. Because there is a planning review,
Mhm.
with the conceptual review to make sure that the setback, the big picture, big picture items, not a giant problem. So that, they're not putting the building, into the setback so far that they can't be at. They're not, 1x, 2x, the allowable for it. But it wouldn't be unusual for a, schematic design to be, 10 or 15% over floor area. Because you could still manipulate the design, to get it there, but it still is, that's a viable kind of site response. You want to make sure that it's not 8 feet over the height limit. That 2 feet over the height limit, would be kind of in the realm of reality. As you're putting together a schematic.
But would you envision as sort of a slightly different role for the ACC, having a slightly broader permit, if you will, in a case like that? Say they come with a schematic that's 2 feet over over the requirement and they provide rationale because they want clear stories or they want to provide more light in the house or whatever. So then would you say, oh, okay, I think it's okay, we're going to allow that? Or would you say,
No.
no, we're going to refigure out, you need to figure out how to
No.
bring this down to meet the requirements?
So the experience of Woodside is that, conceptual design almost always, ends with a conditional approval. That things are pretty close, and that the ASRB doesn't necessarily need to see it. Because it's
It
close.
meets the requirement.
Or it's close. And that staff, can follow up with that when they do the formal design. Other times when the design is, quite a ways off, they'll say, you're headed in the right direction. We acknowledge that these are all the good things you're doing. These are the things that you need to, pay attention to. And you need to come back to us, for, completion of the conceptual design before you go ahead and finish, all your documentation, and all of your numbers and, your landscape watering, numbers and all your civil engineering and everything else, because, you want to keep people, in the design mode,
Mhm.
as long as,
Right.
until they're darn ready.
Mhm.
Because right now the process forces people to do things that they almost don't care about. Until you know your design is approvable, you don't really care about your landscape watering numbers, and you really don't care about, your lighting, or your colors. There's a whole bunch of things that owners aren't ready to decide. Because they don't want to invest in something, so deeply, that they can't back up.
Right, but we had talked about the flexibility of coming before the ACC in the context of the multifamily lots.
Yeah.
Remember when we said, we decided we didn't want third story decks. But if someone were to come to the ACC, we said, well, then maybe we could consider it. So how do you kind of match that idea of being able to have more flexibility with, with the design when it's not actually in an objective requirement or something?
That would effectively require change of 11 feet in a more
Yeah.
significant. And to me, this ordinance change, I have never conceived of as granting ASCC a more liberal authority, to grant variances to the ordinance.
So within the ordinance, you're talking about square footage, you're talking about heights, those types of things versus a third story deck, for example.
To me, this was really to encourage people, to communicate early, and to create a process that essentially engages the community, directly adjacent and around. Not to make it harder, but to actually, create a coach and training, relationship so that the neighbors and the ASCC can end up being coached. And the applicant can say, I've taken all this information in, and here's how I've adjusted the design, in response to that stuff.
Tom used to bring us projects that he had pretty much, the planning department had met with the people early.
Yeah.
And then they would still come to us so early that we could say, you should shift the house, you should move the house, it needs to pull down. The siding's wrong, all of that sort of stuff. And it was always a very effective meeting.
Well, and actually, he would sometimes use the ASCC, to help people who were intentionally recalcitrant, to get a reality check, before they spent a lot of money on a design that wasn't going to get approved.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with this, the direction this is going. I think the only thing that's missing from my mind is to really define very carefully what exactly the requirements that are going to be managed by the planning department versus ASCC. So, in those steps, like you said initially, the planning department's for sure going to give the applicant what the numbers are that they have to stick to. But then there's this gray area where the pre-application kind of idea, is that going to be now shifted more to the ASCC, or what part of that is going to continue to be handled by the planning department? And then what part would be then part of the ASCC's?
Well, if we were going to bifurcate it, kind of at first blush, would be the numbers issue. I'd still want, the planning, planning review, to check those things, against the standards. And I tried to, limit them to, setbacks, where I'm less concerned about impervious surface because it's a more manipulable, part of, the design process, and
Heights.
building height, and a general concept of grading. Because you can guess, I mean, you can, as you do a cut and fill, you look at the section of the cut, and you look at the section of the fill, and you say, well, if this is, if X is equal to Y, then, you're in pretty good shape. If this is two X, to Y, you got a problem. And if this is, 550 yards, and this is 550 yards, you go into planning.
That's right. And that's always a good thing to tell people,
Well, and
that this is going to require that you move up a notch.
so, those basic grammar, I want, without having to spend a boatload of money, with the civil engineer. Because, otherwise you end up, they're going to be in worse shape, than they would have been. So I do think, it's going to take, some tweaking to get to the point where, we've got the right, the right list. But the list, as Jan and I talked about, we was trying to keep it, to what's still in the original design.
Yeah.
Not,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have six consultants, all trying to work on the same, basis. Because once you involve, a consultant or several consultants, and you change anything, it all trickles down.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being a 15-minute change, it's a 4-hour change in 4 hours process.
Well, it's also a consultant who doesn't look through the same lens.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's, I mean, do we have a planner yet? Do we have a senior planner, head of planning? And,
Well, I'm the senior planner, but we.
well, who's the head of planning?
So John Biggs is back. He's helping us
Back
as interim.
temporarily?
Temporarily, exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
but he's listed as special assistant for the town manager.
Okay.
And Terrence, what's his,
Terrence is assisting us as well.
but who's in charge out of the two of them? Who do
So-
you report to?
Well, technically I still report to town manager
Okay.
in this interim period. But I know that we're trying to sort out roles and responsibilities right now, plan for rehiring, filling vacancies. So it's kind of in flux.
Oh,
I'd love to be able to hand something to the new head planner and say, this is the way it's going to go from now. The ASCC is going to do X, Y, and Z.
Well, I think that, if we agree on this is the direction, Dean and I could go back and, take, break down this list. Because I do think that, separating the responsibilities, and how the review, how that
Mhm.
conceptual review would be structured. Because, I believe, the ASCC should be the keeper of the design guideline. That's the reason for design
mm-hmm.
is to be the judge about whether a design, meets, the intent of the design guideline. And the big thing is that the design guidelines, are a broad base of concepts that have to be then judged as to how they fit with a specific site and a specific program. They're not, they're not so clear cut, that, like with the housing, that you've got 30 feet of this, but, so many percentages of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that, particularly with single-family homes on, properties of varying size, I think it would be very difficult, to develop, a cohesive set of objective numbers. But I also know that part of the reason that Portola Valley looks different is because of design, guidelines and the ASCC review. So we'd separate, the numeric calculations from essentially design and the design stuff. And, I think, Gina, if we can come up with, an even less intensive, set of requirements
Mm-hmm.
for the submission. I mean, if I read it again today, wow, there's some stuff here that might not be necessary.
Right.
And we might subcategorize some of those things, like, the concept of showing pictures of examples, or, imagery, around what you're trying to do, I know helps us
Mm-hmm.
enormously. It actually is a natural part of what, most applicants go through.
Right.
They say, well, I
Here's
don't
my
wanna
Pinterest, yeah.
Right.
get the, house or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think the timing for this is beautiful. you know, while we are transitioning, I also think that the people of the town saw the work that we did with the planning commission, and people were blown away. They were thrilled. It's like, where's the planning commission and ASCC been? Because when we get together, we get it done. And the residents heard that, and people kept saying to me, come on, you guys, you know, let's get our government back.
So is there, I mean, you know, is there any dissension, you know, on what Dana and I were talking about? Nothing?
No. Move it forward, man.
Well, can I add one thing that's just, playing devil's advocate here for, this schematic process? Because I do think we should have it, but I'm just bringing up this. You know, you have applicants who they're homeowners, they've hired someone with, you know, a specific aesthetic vision, et cetera. And so I guess I would just say, you know, we want this to be a positive experience. And so, I mean, like as an architect, hearing that we're going to be, you know, sliding buildings around and changing orientation and saying you can't do that specific siding and stuff, that is a little bit, I don't know. And I don't know how we balance that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that at all, but I do think, you know, there's people out there with like very creative and innovative ideas who might want to pitch something that's a little different. And I do think, you know, just balancing between, you know, the design guidelines, you know, meeting the intent of the design guidelines in a way that doesn't kind of stifle creativity or have people feel like, well, I hired this architect and then the ASCC is doing all of this stuff and being a little heavy-handed. I'm throwing it out there as an argument against it, that people could feel like, well, I didn't hire you guys, you know, you're coming in here and you're saying, I can't do this or I can't do that. And
We've
so,
never been the design police ever.
yeah,
I remember 10 Grove, you know, when everybody on Grove said they wouldn't drive us down the street anymore because it looked like McDonald's or something. Because it had corrugated metal.
uh-huh.
I said, well, we're gonna get through the gate down at the end of the street.
Yeah.
But it was, we let that I mean, I think we've
Yeah.
been pretty damn permissive with design.
Yeah, the things that I've been most uncomfortable with, you know, in some of the ASCC decisions over the last few years, you know, is in the relationship of building
Mhm.
lots, you know, to
Mhm.
other people, you know, other properties
Right.
and other long.
Yeah.
Because I projects got a lot of, you know, support from staff, you know, who hadn't visited this, you know, previous staff, that hadn't visited the site. And it met all the numeric limits. But there were relationships between, you know, the views and on some of the, you know, public and private areas of the site that with, you know, some level of adjustment, you know, would have been mitigated in a
Mhm.
better way. That still would have allowed all of the freedom of expression, you know,
Mhm.
and all of the freedom of use. Because I've never wanted, I don't think that the SEC ever, you know, have been the design police, you know,
Mhm.
like some other jurisdictions.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that talked about, you know, well, I just don't like it. Well, I don't think that's part of our vocabulary. You know, to
Yeah.
me, it should be about the relationship, you know, of the on and off site,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
parts of the buildings. And that, you know, if you manipulate the design in a way that begins to either provide mitigations, you know, or obviates the problem because of, you know, a more significant adjustment.
Yeah.
Because that's the other reason that I believe conceptual design fit into the field meeting. And
Yeah.
so that you can actually, caucus the ASCC, so you could all stand in about the same place and say, is this a problem? And as a commission, we could say, yeah, if this was my place, that would be a problem.
Right, yeah.
Or we could say, geez, it's not that big a deal. And then we could say, it's probably okay because it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Over and over, in all the years I was on the ASCC, there were times when the hyperbole, of the different presentations, were so diametrically opposed, we ended up needing to sort it out. And sorting it out, here at the dais, to me is the wrong place.
Yeah,
You need-
absolutely.
You need, you need the opponents and the ACC to see the same thing. And
Before it's set in stone, yeah.
yeah, before it's, because once it's, once you spent $100,000 on a design process.
You're committed to it, yeah.
That one that we just saw last week, the one up on Westridge, neighbors are still really upset about it.
Fine, man.
And they said, what can we do? I said, I don't think we can do anything. It was a conditional approval. But had we been there
Well, and-
early,
And there,
we could have massaged that project.
but there were conditions within them
Yeah, right.
that, were intentionally couched, to create essentially a set of conditions that will require some level of cooperation. And because they wanted their approval instead of a continuance. So because they wanted their approval, they put themselves in a position where they're gonna have to agree. The whole fence deal and.
Right.
There's a bunch of things around. But, and I took a picture the other day, of a project that I don't think he ever looked at it from this position.
Which property was this?
It's the one on, the one
57
on Goya.
Westridge.
Oh, the one on Goya,
Oh, you're talking
and
about a different.
everyone on AFCC, I voted against, I was the only one to vote against it. And
I don't think that was.
all we wanted to do was turn it.
That's the beautiful message.
What is it, Lisa?
Sits up there.
And you didn't, you
Perched.
consulted on that one.
Yeah.
I was before that
I- I-
time.
I-
And you felt that it needed to be turned. And I felt that it needed to be turned.
Turned and lowered. Yeah.
Turned and lowered.
There was a bunch of things, but I don't want to get into the details
Right.
of that. That's not on our agenda. So,
So I guess my kind of question is, all right, you're going to go relook at this list. Well, you have kind of two things. One, you're going to define what the steps are and exactly what planning department's going to do and when it comes to us and whatever. And you're going to figure out what the minimum requirements are, even though you could recommend that they also include some other things. So then my question is, okay, so an applicant has done a lot of the stuff on here and they really would like to get feedback from the ASCC, even though they haven't quite figured out which trees they're removing. Are we going to have the flexibility to say, okay, well, you've got enough here for us to look at it? Or are we going to be super strict about saying,
I'd like.
you haven't figured out exactly which trees you're leaving?
Sorry for interrupting. I'd like them to decide when they want.
Okay.
Yeah. I would agree. I would think we could put together recommended documents that would produce the, the best, most thorough review. But if someone's really, on a site that's really tricky and they really want early feedback, I would think
Right.
that we should be flexible to look
Yeah.
at something on the earlier side, even if they don't have all these materials, just so that they could get early feedback to know okay, this is what we're thinking. Is this
Yeah.
even
Oh, yeah,
feasible?
that's
for
great.
approval?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing.
Um,
Change it from, minimum requirements to recommended documents.
Yeah, just the recommendations. Because, I mean, looking at this, so I know, Carter, you've been using Woodside as an example, but, other municipalities around the area, like even Palo Alto, Atherton, Los Altos, you do a planning review first before you go in for your building permit review, like we're doing here. These document lists are very similar. And, in terms of the amount of effort it takes to get there, I mean, sure, there is a fair amount that goes into these documents, but it's pretty typical for sort of a planning submittal where then you're building up with your civil and your landscape and your other consultants are coming in for the building permit submittal, which is kind of more standard practice in the area, Woodside and other places.
Yeah.
And so I think this list kind of takes it maybe a little bit more into the planning, the typical planning phase documents that an architect would put together.
The other
Um,
alternative might be to change the ASCC's actual owner review process. And, to move much of that into the building permit process, with certain conditions, because, I don't think the ASCC cares as much about, the underground drainage and the piping, all of the other stuff.
That would be an ordinance
That would-
update, correct?
Yeah, well, I think all of this might be an ordinance change, so I think that we'll need to sort a few things out. I do believe that, we're gonna need, Adrian's help in, sorting out what's ordinance versus what's policy.
You said it earlier, Portola Valley looks different than any other town, and that's because of the ASCC. And
Well, it's-
Woodside may do things similarly, but we look way different than Woodside.
Yeah, it's
And
it's
way
very-
different than Los Altos Hills.
Yeah.
And I think that's really poignant. I mean, we've built something so fabulous here,
Mhm,
and I want to keep that going.
mhm. Okay. So, we'll identify the steps. I will identify the recommended documents.
If you guys want me to pursue the legal stuff with the town of Woodside,
Well,
I have
I'd love to know
24
how,
hours left.
Fine.
Try to get it in.
yeah,
I take it your surgery soon?
Wednesday.
It's just your leg. It'll be fine.
3 hours
You won't notice it.
under.
You won't even know.
I know.
I'm really afraid I'm losing drugs.
I saved all my dad's more than. I know.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, I'm so glad you guys did this.
Do we need an actual
motion?
motion? An actual motion to,
Yeah.
To continue.
I'd love a motion, that,
Wait, can I ask, before you do that, can I ask
public comment.
one more question too? We're talking about taking a lot of this documentation and making it more optional. What do you think about the story polls? Do you think that that should be something that is required as opposed to optional? Or is it kind of part of the, like, you get out what you put in? I mean, how do we manage? Because I feel like without the story polls, we sort of lose what we're trying to do with getting neighbor feedback on the earlier side and being able to look at some of these
massing?
complaints and say, okay, is it overblown or is it, do we have a problem here? That's the one thing I'm just wondering about. Not,
I mean,
not complete, but
I think some level of story poll, to identify, the height, at the extent of the roof,
mhm.
the change. Yeah, as I tried to draft in the memo, you know, I wanted to leave it to the team, you know, design team and the applicant to decide how they're gonna try to explain their design. And I do believe that story poles, in most cases, do an extraordinary job of explaining what, you know, what the short and long range impact is.
Mhm.
You know, particularly if we see our charge as principally about offsite impact. Because the minutia of the grading and the walks and the landscaping next to the house, you know, I think is of less public interest. And if our interest is mostly around the public interest, and then seeing what it looks like from across the valley, you know, or from the street below, or from the neighbor's house or the neighbor's patio.
Could we eliminate the idea of having to have a surveyor put up the story poles and have them certified and all those kind of
Yeah, definitely.
expensive little add-ons that we require for,
$3,000 foot.
exactly. So just having your potential builder or somebody, you know, add some poles to on top of an existing house would give you a sense of
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
public comments.
Are there any public comments on this issue? Quickly?
Christine, can you press the little button?
Yes, I think story poles are extremely important for neighbors and those around. I'd prefer them even for ADUs so we can get an idea of height if the ADUs get higher. But I think especially for subdivisions that are going to become large projects, we need to have an idea of what this looks like driving by and next to our homes. I know I may be surrounded by some builds in the future. And without story poles, I have no idea if I want to deal with that or not. And so please give us story poles.
Yeah.
And I'm all for even inviting the public to site visits. We used to do that. And if I'm a neighbor, I want to be invited. So it was really surprising to hear that we're not invited to some of these that are schools or, you know, where we needed clarification as well to walk the property. So we're people living in this town and we want to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody online?
We have two hands. First would be Dave Cardinal. Just one moment.
David, go ahead.
Hi, first, as I've said before, I think this is an amazing idea. I personally think it's gotten a little different than what I imagined. If it's in the service of the homeowner, I would like to personally see it as, hey, here's the deal. You've got an amazing opportunity to find out what's up in Portola Valley, and the ASCC will meet with you and talk to you about your plans. Now, in my case, that might be as simple as, I don't know, we have a couple acres across a ravine, we might want an ADU, is that even plausible? In other cases, it might be, we have this Palo Alto architect and they have tons of lighting and they don't really understand Portola Valley. If it's in their interest, then I don't think there should be requirements. There should be a checklist of, hey, here's what we can do. And the more of these you bring, we recommend you have the following done before you talk to us. But to the extent they have competent architects, they're not stupid, hopefully. And they want to take advantage of a meeting with the ASCC to deal with the things they don't understand about Portola Valley or want to learn about Portola Valley or aren't sure about siting on a hill or whatever. And like story poles and all that. I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, water under the bridge. And I mean, by that point, you're kind of into it. So my gut says it should be at the applicant's discretion up to a point. They get to use their one free pass, and there's a lot of recommendations about what would make that most valuable for them. But the minute you put a lot of requirements on, it's just one more meeting, I don't know, that people have to go to and suffer through in the process. So I hope we do it. I just hope it's lightweight and for the benefits of the applicants. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Next.
Next, we have Ben Malka. Go ahead.
Hi, Ben. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. First of all, I wanted to applaud all of you for taking this seriously and putting the time and energy and effort into being responsive to the community and making sure that the ASCC takes its role seriously in protecting the community and creating an architectural ethic which is befitting the town. And I'm really excited to see you guys actually spend the time and energy to do this. So again, my kudos to all of you for having taken this seriously. I would also submit to you that the existing process is totally broken. That when a homeowner submits plans, there's very little opportunity for comment. Those comments aren't taken seriously and they're dismissed right away. And the ASCC meeting is today very difficult to impact the overall design as a neighbor, and it's too late in the process. So I would suggest earlier is better, more neighbor involvement is better, and it shouldn't be optional, it should be required. I think it was required at one point in time, and it'll diffuse a lot of the tension that exists today as you as the ACC can create the opportunity for cooperative interactions between neighbors rather than I'm trying to get my design through and anybody who's speaking up is trying to get in my way, which is how it works today. So I would also say that, the comment around freedom of expression, I don't think most of the tension here is around freedom of expression. I don't hear a lot of situations in which, at least recently, neighbors have said, I don't like your design. It's, I don't like the impact you're having on other properties and what the town can see of what you're doing. And so I would invite freedom of design. I would just say we should be more sticking to the design guidelines and the general plan that exists to protect the town. And we are different than Woodside. We are different than Los Altos Hills, and it's by design. And right now we're on the precipice of losing that. And I mentioned to at least a couple of you, I come from a real estate family and I can smell opportunity in real estate. And we're right on the edge of being an opportunity for spec developers to come in and build the maximum that they can on the lots with very little input from any regulatory body in town. So I don't think any of us want to go there. I certainly don't. That's not why I moved here.
Thank you, Ben. Any other public comment? Close the public portion of this meeting. Any further discussion?
I guess I have one other kind of question is practicality in terms of how the charges would happen. So that's something else to kind of put in your purview of what to look at. How would you go about, I mean, if this is going to reduce the impact of the cost for the final ASCC meeting, the actual formal one, are we going to push the cost into this more pre-application type of meeting, or are they going to be split up? Or that's something we do need to think about because there's going to be staff time that's required. Staffs will be present at this ASCC meeting, this, whatever we're going to call it, conceptual meeting. So there's,
I think we can probably work out some kind of spreadsheet to, estimate what that means and probably put some limits on it.
yeah, otherwise.
And then sorry, I'm just asking some more clarifying questions. So in terms of how this is working, we're proposing this optional conceptual design review step. And I think the question would be like, is it optional or does it just become, does the process shift back, right? Or shift to an earlier stage? But I guess my question is like, what is the where does the review happen? Is the review, is it a hearing? Is it a public hearing? So then you're saying that you're then doing another hearing? Or is it that people, we're sort of facilitating, we're going to look at all this stuff, we're going to go to the site visit, we're facilitating conversations with neighbors earlier on and kind of, looking at it together and having these conversations together at first. And then, could people choose if they want to do a hearing or not in terms of whether this gets resolved early or not? The reason why I bring that up is that, you might have a property that, like in my neighborhood, there's not views across the valley at everyone's houses and stuff. And there are a lot of neighbors, but, people might not care that much, from a neighbor opinion where it is a little bit more dense. They might not have as many issues or complaints. It has less impact, site impacts on adjacent areas. You could look at that and have the site meeting and the neighbors could be like, okay, yeah, looks cool to me. And the ASCC could be like, okay, you're doing a 1-story house and your lot's not super sloped. I think like as a homeowner, I might be like, well, do I have to do an extra hearing because that adds time and everything else? That would be my only
I was just
question.
looking at the SB 330, meeting limit. And it limits it to 5 public meetings, 5 public hearings,
Mhm.
including appeals. So if you reserve 2 meetings for appeal, then you only have 3. And if they need a planning commission meeting before, for the site clear, which frankly is, that's where, the town staff has been trying to get, the ASCC approval in one.
Mhm.
So you don't end up, essentially having a default position where you have to, you have to give an approval to something you don't want to.
Mhm.
So
After that, whether or not it's a public hearing. I mean, it would have to be a public hearing.
well, it has to be public if, if more than 2 of us are there.
Yeah, got it.
And I think it defies logic not to make it public.
Yeah.
I still
No, I
think it's the most important thing that we've ever done.
Because I think the shift is to try to put more emphasis on the preliminary and less emphasis on down at the end.
Yeah.
Because we have many more required consultants, and peer reviews, on the details. And the majority of those details have less to do with design, and more to do with, technical engineering,
Mhm.
components. And so I'm in the camp that if you push the design review earlier, clients are gonna like it better.
Yeah, there's less.
Neighbors are gonna, have, a greater opportunity for input. We'll end up with, greater opportunity, to sort out the hyperbole from the truth, and develop a real basis for recommendations. And you can also then provide, as we have in the pre-2012 period, conditions, for the peer review, to pay attention to certain things.
So are you advocating having, in a situation where there is going to be, the planning determines if there's going to be a site development permit required from the planning commission? Are you advocating the ACC should have a preliminary design before that then? just so that you can kind of preempt whether or not they really have to
Well,
move so much dirt around or whatever.
In the old days, you know, the plan, if there was, if it was gonna go to planning commission, there was a preliminary meeting with the planning commission that then I referred to the ASCC. You know, and then the ASCC did review and then referred it back, you know, to the planning commission. And a lot of times the ASCC would have two meetings, preliminary meeting, you know, and a more complete meeting before we sent it back to the planning commission, you know, because
On new houses.
on all new houses that required planning commission approval. You know, and those are threshold for grading was so low.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically 500 cubic yards of, you know, of cut and 500 cubic yards of fill, which is really small.
Yes, very low. Because I'm wondering if at this point, given SB 330, if it is determined that a proper project is going to have to go through planning, that all of a sudden we're going to kind of need to have that planning be a planning / ASCC meeting, combined meeting, so that we can get in, you know, that extra. Because otherwise it could very well, you know, I can see somebody who's got huge amounts of money, you know, dragging it out so that then the appeals, they get what they want essentially. And we don't get to say something. Because that's exactly what someone's going to do. You know, they know the rules, they could drag it out over little things, but then they end up getting what they want, as opposed to suing the town.
Through the chair, I do want to clarify that a project is subject to SB 330 if it's considered a housing project, which is 2 or more units. So if it's just a single family home,
Plus an ADU, would that then become 2 units, right? Which
Probably.
Pretty, I don't
Probably
believe
could.
there's any major project that doesn't include an ADU.
And
That's
most
fair.
projects are having an
That's fair.
ADU.
Every project, you know, in California now, because every property was allowed 2 units.
Right.
So it's, I do think, you know, you need to take that into account. But I do think that front loading, you know, the requirement for design review, it will have the greatest benefit for both the applicants, the neighbors, you know, and the ethos of the town. But waiting, right, you know, and I do think that a significant number, you know, of the ASCC's checklist needs to shift, you know, to building permit. Because I don't think that they are, you know, germane to site design, building design, landscape design, or development standards.
And then, sorry, I'm that person who keeps asking another question, another question, another question.
You only got one more.
This is my last. So, and I'm just mostly asking this, like, curious how you guys all feel about it. If somebody did this kind of preliminary work, was thorough, did the story polls, we have the hearing, and it's kind of overwhelmingly positive, on the right track. We're not seeing any major issues, no major things that need to be worked out with neighbors. At that preliminary hearing, could you say that, like, could someone just do one hearing and not have to do another?
I think if we lay it out that at any point, the ASCC would have the opportunity to, you know, to take action.
Okay.
In the old days, the preliminary meetings were all excluded action. You know, and I know what happened is that some neighbors knew that there wasn't any potential action, you know, and laid in the weeds instead of fully participating.
And then showed up later to, to put a bomb, drop a bomb.
Interesting.
I mean, I could envision this preliminary review having conditional approvals, essentially. You're saying you're in the right direction, you're doing this, but this is a conditional approval and you need to come back to 1 or 2 members of the ASCC as opposed to having come back with a complete, it's assuming that it actually made it that way. I mean, I'm sure.
And I do think that, part of what our process should be, is that if the grading, is likely to exceed 1,000 cubic yards, that the preliminary meeting needs to be with the planning commission.
Yeah, I think
Because
That makes sense.
that will avoid, at least, that will at least, reduce the
take out a
number,
meeting.
number of meetings by one.
mhm.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I like that. I was just making sure everyone else, before we go back and so add updates to this memo.
Like-
So overdue.
You said it's quiet, peace and mind.
Let's come up with a good action.
So, from staff's point of view, do we need a motion or can we just, build this based on consensus?
It can't hurt to have a motion, just to have an official action.
Dorota? So,
Um,
let's make a motion, that, encapsulates, the issues here and gives, the general direction, to the continuation, of the subcommittee, to establish, steps, recommended documents, at what points there'll be action by the ASCC, an understanding of how to deal with, the charges associated with, staff time and, take the next cut. And can we do that, in 2 weeks? When's the next meeting?
Well, you'll have a lot less than that because the staff would need
I think we
a
might,
good week before that to.
and we might have a couple projects that night, so I don't know if you want to jam in.
Maybe we should do the next.
The next one is the 26th. Let's, put that on the calendar for the 26th. At least one of the items. And that, Gina, we'll need to, get our memo done, around the 16th of August.
Could we kind of phrase it that we make a motion to approve creation of an optional conceptual design review step? With-
I'm not in favor of the optional step. I'm, as we've talked, I'm in favor of making it mandatory.
Okay,
But
I'm not,
shifting the bulk of the work.
Okay.
Forward in the design process.
then let's phrase it, a motion to create a conceptual design review step in the ASCC review process to be refined by the subcommittee. And then all the things you listed already.
Is that your motion?
Yes.
Is there a
I'll
there's-
second it.
all in favor?
I,
Aye. So approved, 4-0.
At least the council will see this, and I think that it'll be good for them.
Next item on the agenda is the March something meeting minutes.
No, I think first we have commission reports and staff report, and then followed by minutes.
So commissioner reports. Anybody got anything to report?
No.
No.
nope.
So we're gonna have a party at Dana's, so, so we can giggle at her while she's under the influence of her.
I need you guys to come and just stick your head in the window.
Yeah.
And I want to sign your papers.
Looking for
Staff report here.
Staff reports.
Okay, yeah, just two really brief items. As you know, after ASCC and Planning Commission completed the zoning code amendments, they were adopted by ordinance by town council. And we sent that along to our HCD reviewer to start considering. Since then, we've had some informal back and forth, clarifying questions of staff and consultants. We don't have an official response yet from them, a formal letter of determination, but we're hoping to get there soon. So once we receive that letter, we'll plan on doing a news item, post it to forum and let the town know what they've said.
Do they have a certain time period when they're supposed to get back to?
I asked that in a recent email and I wasn't answered, so I'm gonna try again and just see. I know they have a required, I think it's 60 days from when we submitted. So I think we'll be coming up to that pretty soon.
Do you have a sense of what questions they had, the clarifying questions, what their issues were?
Questions about, allowing exclusive residential and mixed use, things that are covered off in the housing element. Anyways, yeah, just some sort of little bits and pieces that we're trying to answer and make sure they're satisfied. But nothing major right now, nothing scary, I would say.
And the other item?
Other item is that we did receive an appeal for 857 Westridge today. So staff is going to go through that submission, make sure we have everything in order, then that has to get forward to Planning Commission so that they are on notice. And then in terms of timing, no less than 21 days, Planning Commission will have to meet to hear the appeal, and no more than 55 days. And this is after receipt of the appeal that was submitted today.
Do you know in particular what part they're appealing?
Not yet.
Interesting.
857.
Fletcher.
Okay.
We should drive up and take a look.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in that one.
Yeah, this is the one, this was the one from a couple weeks ago. Yeah. So that's it for staff reports. Thank you.
It's public comments. Okay, go ahead, Christie.
Adrian, I'm not fully understanding what you're saying that HCD is trying to clarify. You kind of, I need more clarity on that. You said exclusive residential and much bits and pieces. And so if you could be more direct on that answer, that'd be great. Thank you.
I can't be too direct on that answer right now because I don't have a formal response from them. So it's just, they're just asking questions of us, just back and forth of that, you know, our housing element is translated effectively into our zoning code amendments. So again, I feel more comfortable if we had a letter in hand laying out their response from them. I think this is a productive back and forth with them. Because then if there's any clarifying stuff or we can give them a comfort level without them giving a denial letter to us, this is a good process.
So their question, just so that I can interpret for myself, what you said is that they were asking, would the MU zoning district allow exclusive?
Yeah, that was one question, for example. Yeah.
There's nothing in the zoning ordinance that, this disallows.
That's correct. Mhm.
Actually, the way the numbers work, it's encouraged. But the mixed use zoning district, the way it was constituted in the recommendation, didn't disallow only residential uses. But it limited, the amount of area that a non-residential use, could be. So, in effect, it actually encourages all 100% residential uses because you'd end up with effectively more units to rent or bigger units to rent,
In the commercial districts,
in the MU.
which
Well, MU is not commercial.
But it's a combination of commercial and
Right.
resident.
Yeah, but it's pretty limited. But anyway. Our next item of business, since
There is a raised hand. I don't know if we can
sure.
take that. Okay. Dave Cardinal, go ahead.
Dave, how's it going, man?
I want you to sing that song to me again on the phone.
I'll sing it to you, a song about design review and public comments.
Yeah, there you go. Super quick comment. Speaking of which, when you guys are leaning forward talking to the mics, it's pretty easy to hear you, but when you turn to each other or lean back, I know it's easy to turn to each other because you can't see the hundreds of us thronging here online to listen. But the microphones are still kind of important. So the more you can do to be near the microphones, the better. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Moving on to approval of the March 25th, 24 minutes. There were some spelling things and there's some text things, and there was I think there was one public comment that didn't quite get understood. So I'll deal with the one public comment that I don't think was understood. It was, during public comments by Rita Combs, where it said that she did, potentially didn't care about, coming to the meetings anymore. That was 100% the opposite of her intention. She was frankly pleased that the ASCC was meeting more often again, and that she was happy about that. So if we can, change the intent, of that. Go ahead, Christie.
What I actually said, because I think some things were omitted. I said, I think, thank you. I think you all are asking really good questions, and it feels good to hear the discussion, which we have not always heard. And then also excluded was, please reach out to residents and include us in any discussions regarding how we visualize multi-use, multi-family building, not just staff and committee. Please invite us to a meeting to create the visualization of multi-use and multi-family housing as it looks like we're going in that direction. So, many of us that care about how buildings look going forward, we've been collecting pictures. I mean, as I drive through different cities all over California, I'm collecting pictures, and I want an opportunity to bring those pictures to someone that might like a few of them. And the 4 pictures that were in the presentation, I would like to see updated if that is what is going to be shown to developers. So I also said, I have exactly what I said here, and I would like to submit it now and have it possibly
Please submit that.
with what was written.
Sure.
They are summary minutes. They're not verbatim minutes. So if you want Christie's passage verbatim on a one-off, you can make that request. I can stick it in there.
Sure. We can go ahead.
Okie dokie.
Any other specific changes? I'm looking for that passage.
Carter, okay, perfect. I was just gonna ask.
I remember reading it and
Shared her initial hesitation to continue attending ACC meetings.
yes.
Due to their
that's the
infrequency?
one.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's short. So yeah, tell me what you,
Well, what she was trying to express is her happiness that we are having meetings, and that she will continue, to participate in them,
okay,
rather than hesitation that she would stop participating.
okay.
So I think it was, probably a syntax error. I think I'm actually pleasantly pleased at, how accurate this set of minutes feels.
They're actually really good. Yeah, I thought so too, because there's a lot of material. It was a long meeting.
Yeah, they had to take a tea break.
That's right. We did. We needed a break.
So I would move to approve the minutes with those changes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. 4-0. Don't need a motion to adjourn. So meeting's adjourned.
If you made note that